Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Meeks, it sounded like there was some new sanctions and authority in here that you might be uncomfortable with. Are you comfortable with all the new sanction authority that's granted in this in the bills that are covered by this rule?
Yeah, many of the problems that I had with this or some of the sanction authorities, there was no waivers for humanitarian aid. And we were focused on trying to make sure that innocent individuals are not caught up into it. We've negotiated some, as I've indicated, in 3 of the bills we were able to negotiate to get humanitarian aid in them, and it made the bill better and thereby earned my support in that regards. But I was concerned about sanctions where there are no waivers.
And all of those concerns have been taken care of?
Yeah, basically, they have in 4 of the bills, so as I mentioned during my opening statement.
And if I could add, I think
go for it. Go ahead.
I think Mr. Meeks is offering an amendment.
Yes.
On that very issue that I support.
We've been working together. We had good conversations on that.
So there's roughly $100 billion in here, most of it for military assistance. Could this be used to purchase cluster munitions, Ranking Member Meeks?
Cluster. I'm not sure whether it could be used for cluster. I know it is. We are concerned. I know I am concerned about certain cluster munitions and their accuracy, so that I'm always concerned about innocent individuals being injured and trying to make sure, for humanitarian purpose, we don't hurt innocent boys and girls. There's been a history of, after wars, clusters in the ground, never designated. People come by and they are devastated as a result of it. So I wanted to make sure, yes, I want to make sure that we are abiding by some of the war powers of reference to the types of weapons that we utilize. I want to make sure they are weapons that are ordinarily utilized or should be utilized in places of war.
Would you support an amendment to prohibit the money in this for going to cluster munitions?
Yeah, I would very definitely look at that. That's something that would consider, yes.
Chairman McCall, could the money here in the bills covered by this rule be used for cluster munitions?
As I understand, that money has already been appropriated in the regular appropriations process, and Mr. Cole may be able to speak to that on the use of cluster munitions. And I know that I understand your concerns with those munitions. The Russians are using them against the Ukrainians in Ukraine. The Ukrainians just want to use them in their own country to get the Russians out. They are highly effective weapons, but with respect to your question on the funding, perhaps Mr. Cole can answer this. I think that was in the original package.
If I may?
Yeah, please, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't even going to ask you any questions, but I'll defer all the time you want.
Well, I certainly shouldn't pass up on an offer like that. But I do just, since Chairman McCall asked, yeah, the authority is in there on the SFOPS portion, is my understanding. And I agree with Chairman McCall. Again, these have been deployed by the Russians first. The Ukrainians have asked for the ability to do this within their own country. I'm sure something they would prefer not to do, quite frankly, but they felt that way. And I know the President, when we dealt with this issue earlier, because we had an extensive discussion about this on this committee, didn't want to do that either. But he was reluctantly put in the position where he felt like he had to. So, again, I think this is one where the moral dilemma is created by our adversaries. It's certainly not created by the Ukrainians. I don't think it's something the Americans want to do. But, war is a terrible thing. And when your enemy uses a weapon and people that are defending themselves ask for the ability to do the same within their own country, very difficult for me. And, again, I respect those. I know people have a different opinion on this. On this committee. But, again, I just wanted to be honest with you. Yes, the authority is in the bill.
I appreciate that. Representative DeLaura, would you support an amendment to prohibit the purchase of cluster munitions or transfer of cluster munitions with the money that's provided in these bills?
Well, as it's been said, the authority is there, and there's been an agreement on both sides of how to try to move forward on this issue. And what is being accomplished.
So the authority to purchase cluster munitions is contained or enabled by the bills in this rule. My question, I'll try to be more clear. Would you support an amendment to remove that authority to purchase cluster munitions with the money in this bill?
I think that the discussion has been, it has been. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. I think, as I say, the authority is there, and there's been agreement on how to try to move forward on this to account for the various and diverse opinions that agree and disagree on this issue. So I would just stand with where the bill currently is on this issue.
So that sounds like a no. You would not support removing the authority for cluster munitions in the bill. Is that correct?
I said what I said. I don't know how many more times I can repeat it. I will support the bill that has the authority.
Okay. Thank you. I want to move on to the Repo Act, which is one of the many bills contained in the fourth title, I believe. There is some concern expressed by senators during markup, senators who have experience, at least one senator in the banking industry, that this could affect the treasury market for our own treasuries. So if I understand correctly, if a Russian sovereign fund or Russian bank owns treasuries that are here in the United States, we would be seizing those treasuries. Is that correct?
Yes.
So here's the basis for the concern. So, we auction treasuries occasionally. We have to issue new debt, unfortunately, to cover new expenditures that we haven't paid for, and also when old debt expires. And the concern is that when sovereign countries and sovereign wealth funds look at purchasing those treasuries, if we actually consummate this Repo Act, that those countries will have less appetite for what was the most secure investment in the world, which is the U.S. Treasury. They may have less appetite for purchasing it, particularly if they're not an extremely close ally. If they end up on the bad list and their Treasury gets repoed, Mr. McCall, do you share that concern that this may affect the U.S. Treasury's ability to sell these financial instruments?
We've used this authority in the past, and the premise is essentially if you cause harm or injury, you essentially sort of waived your sovereign immunity, if you will, and so the assets that are frozen under sanctions are, as a result, can pay for the harm and injury that has been done by a country that is violating international law, which in this case I believe Russia is. And I'll be happy to get back to you on the more minutiae of this, but I would say overall, this is a very popular provision in this bill because what it says is essentially let Russia pay for its own war crimes, not the American taxpayer. These are seized Russian assets under international law, legally, and by law. We've done this before twice, where if a country causes that sort of harm or injury to another country and the assets are seized, and then they can be used for reparations. I think certainly once we get into Reconstruction, if we ever get there, that would be a wise use as well. I don't think most Americans out there want us using taxpayer dollars in any of this. They would prefer it to be from the Russian oligarchs and sovereign assets that have helped pay for Putin's war machine.
My concern is that we could end up costing the American taxpayers more because the cost of financing our debt could go up if we reduce the appetite for U.S. treasuries when they go for auction. So I hope that's been factored into the cost. Now, this has been used in the past, but as I understand that, we were in conflict. We were engaged in direct conflict. This would be in Iraq, for instance, the Iraq-Kuwait War, and we used sort of United Nations Security Council plan to seize those assets, and they were used for victims of the Iraqi invasion in Kuwait. But the difference there is that we were directly involved in a military action with Iraq. And so this, I believe this would be the first time the United States has seized and repurposed frozen sanctioned assets owned by a foreign state, despite the absence of any direct military engagement.
I respectfully disagree that in two of those instances, the establishment of the Iran Claims Tribunal in 1981 and 1992, seizure of Iraqi assets for the transfer to the United Nations, the U.S. was not at war with the country whose assets were involved. And I believe that the Treasury market is very strong in the United States. I don't think this is going to have the dire warning impact that you think it would. Again,
in that circumstance, I believe it was the United Nations, and there was some, I think probably at least some comfort from the other countries that we didn't act unilaterally and we were acting with other countries, so we weren't acting arbitrarily toward one seizing and repurposing one country's assets. But here we're going alone. We're not doing it with a group of other countries or United Nations Security Council.
We don't do this alone, by the way, and this is also supported by President Trump's former economic advisor and people like Newt Gingrich. People, I trust Trump's economic advisor more than some of the sideline, people trying to get in the game. He thinks it's a great idea.
Well, those are people I respect. I'm just the people who buy our treasuries may not respect Newt Gingrich as much as I do.
Well, but I think the former economic advisor of the president,
right? So
President Trump, he's in strong support of this. This has strong support across, bipartisan. Again, the underlying premise being, I think the Treasury market's going to be fine in the United States. I think that the underlying premise is, who do you want to pay for this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm worried. I still have that concern. There may be bipartisan support here, but I think it sends a signal to the rest of the countries in the world that we just may take your treasuries. If you buy them from us, we may just take them back. And I think that's a little bit dangerous.
But we're not doing this. This is not, this is the EU, it's the United States. I mean, they're all involved in these sanctions. I guess you go back to the premise we have even sanctioned of these assets.
So one other concern that people have expressed in the Repo Act is that we would tie the hands of future president. That's a provision in this bill, I believe, that another president can't undo this. Would that be? Is that something the Democrats wanted in here so that Trump couldn't normalize relations later on?
I'm not concerned about what Mr. Trump would do. I'm concerned about what President Biden would do. And we want to ensure, just like with Nord Stream 2, when we sanctioned that pipeline of energy going from Russia into Europe, and we put a presidential waiver in there. And guess what? President Biden waived that sanction that Congress imposed, a mandatory sanction. And guess what? What came out of that? Europe became dependent on Russian energy. I never thought he would do it, but he did. And when you talk about the clock, the timetable of history, that was the first sign of weakness. And Afghanistan came after that. This was designed not for President Trump. In fact, President Trump is not going to be bound by this. If he doesn't want to be. I think it's good policy, and it was just really because of the history of this president, President Biden waiving congressional sanctions, and we didn't want him to disrespect the Congress again on this one.
So does or does it not bind future presidents?
I think that can be entertained in a future administration. We did this to tie President Biden's hands so he would have to do this. Have to enforce it.
Right.
Because of the lack of trust from Nord Stream 2.
We haven't had much time to read these bills. I'm going on prior versions of the bill. So maybe I'm incorrect here, but I believe it does remove the president's ability to enter or alter sanctions regime. And my concern here is that could limit the president's negotiating leverage and undermine the ability to come to some kind of peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine war if he has to come back to Congress to undo the sanction?
I think that my understanding from the legislature, once the conditions are met, then the obligation is completed.
And what are those conditions?
That these assets be used to pay for not only the efforts that we're undergoing today, but the reconstruction.
Well, I think so. That hasn't ameliorated my concerns, and other people still have this concern that we may have a change in the presidency at the end of this year, and that this conflict could still be going on, and that I understand the desire to keep the president from having a lot of wiggle room here, but it may be keeping him from having wiggle room in a direction that the next president needs to end a conflict.
Again, and I get your point. The intent was to bind the current president, current administration, based on the track record of not enforcing sanctions. I'll give you some other examples. Iran. He's not enforcing the energy sanctions. Iran has sold $80 billion to China. That's funded their terror operations. The UN sanctions lapsed, and I have a bill to fix that and it's in this bill, on the missiles and drones that Iran is selling to Russia to kill Ukrainians. He's not enforcing that one. Why? Because they want to accommodate and appease Iran to get this Iran deal. Remember the hostage swap? That was a great one. 6 Iranian spies for 6 innocent civilians, and we paid them $6 billion. And then $10 billion of electricity they could sell into Iraq. And I mean, every time I turn around, they're cutting some deal with Iran to get more money. I don't trust them with sanctions. That's why it's not in here. It's not about President Trump. It's about binding this president. If you want me to write that in there, I will.
I think it'd be hard to write something depending on who wins the next election, but I think that does appeal to the Democrats, the fact that Trump's hands would be tied in this regard. And so another concern that I have, and I want to know if you have the same concern, is that there may be some retaliation. That I believe the Repo Act, as it's written here, only intends to seize sovereign assets that are owned by the country, not private individuals of the country. But is it possible that U.S. assets in Russia could get seized as a retaliation to the Repo Act?
I don't believe so. And I think that, look, this right now we can only do what's seized in this country. When I talk to the NATO allies in the EU, the United States leads, and they will probably follow. A lot of this is in Brussels, as you know, but there's also a provision that, I think the theory is, at least I know if you want to get into the former president, that he supports, this loan program. He wants the idea that we're going to continue to help them so that when he gets into office, he can negotiate a better agreement. And there's a provision that once he accomplishes that this obligation would be relinquished.
So speaking of the loan forgiveness and the loan aspect of the Ukraine money, it sounds like a good idea. I think they're probably not going to have the ability to pay it back, so it's almost kind of moot. Why wouldn't we loan the money to Israel and Taiwan and the other countries that are in here? They have the capacity to pay it back, so why not loan it to them?
So I hate to put my colleague on the spot here. That's more in the appropriations bills. It's not my provision. But I'll tell you what I think. I mean, look.
He's the former chairman, so I prefer not to put him on the spot.
But
he was so kind to everybody in those chairs when he was in that chair.
I will say that provision is not in this bill that Mr. Meeks and I have worked on.
Mr. Meeks, Ranking Member Meeks, why wouldn't we have a loan forgiveness? I see that we have a loan and program for Ukraine. if that's a great innovation, why don't we do that for the money that's going to Israel and Taiwan?
Again, that's appropriations as opposed to.
Okay, I'll ask Ranking Member DeLauro. It's trying every way in the world to save you from this, Chairman Cole.
Hey, man, it's in your bill, man.
Yeah, and it may be because it was a Republican demand in order to be able to get.
I'm sorry, can we have order?
It may have been, I wasn't a party to it, but it may have been a Republican demand in order to get funding for Ukraine. That's what may have simply been a totally political issue in order to get to people who do not see the value, the U.S.'s value in providing aid to Ukraine. So you all ought to think about that and whether or not. It is not really, I should say that for me personally, it was the Senate package came forward with the way it was without this, but this is what the Republican majority wanted to do. So please talk to your colleagues about that. Do not talk to the Democrats about it.
That is
I don't want to.
right. Of course, as I said in my opening statement, all of these are Republican-led bills. I didn't even want to do a sidecar. We didn't have to. I just wanted to do the Senate
Take
bill.
responsibility.
Yeah, if I've got to add the loan program, though, the EU has the same program with Ukraine, this loan program, and so we thought that it made sense. And I think the former president agreed that, make this a loan, not just a giveaway.
Ranking Member DeLauro, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'd like you to sum up your opinion on the loan aspect of the money that goes to Ukraine. Do you believe it's a gimmick?
Look, as I said, I was very, very supportive of, I'm not supportive of using loans for emergency needs. That hasn't been the way in which we have moved in the past, okay? So it was the House Republicans' cost. You ready for that? The House Republicans' cost for getting the funds. It is a bad precedent, but that was the only way in which we could move on funds for Ukraine. And you want to talk about trying to get something done? We're here to try to get something done, not to put roadblocks, barriers to wherever you want to go on getting aid to Ukraine. That is what our job is to do. Forgivable loan, bad precedent, and which I'm opposed to, did not come out of the Senate bill, but that's how we needed to. That was the Republicans' price. So please, talk to your colleagues about it. Don't talk to the Democrats.
It sounds like you support the bill, though. So somehow you got.
I support the bill because we need to get aid to Ukraine. And you know what? It's about. Someone mentioned up here what we do in this body, and I've negotiated along with Chairman Cole appropriations bills over the years. Does everybody get what they want? No. Do we really compromise on issues for the greater good to try to move forward? Yes. That is what is called governing. That's why we all come here. That is, we come here to be able to govern and to get things done. In this respect, getting aid to Ukraine is imperative.
All right, let me move on and ask about Gaza. How much money is in here for Gaza, Ranking Member Meeks?
Well, it's $9 billion for humanitarian aid, not all of which is going to Gaza, but it's for humanitarian aid throughout the world, as it was in the Senate bill.
How much, Ranking Member DeLauro, how much of that will go to Gaza?
That is really, there isn't a specific number. As you probably know or maybe don't know, they never do earmark the funds that go to humanitarian assistance because something can come up in which there needs to be the flexibility in order to be able to provide humanitarian aid. As I said in my remarks, you are looking at Sudan, you're looking at Haiti, you're looking at Somalia. People have talked about the countries that are in the greatest need, including Gaza. So there is not a specific dollar amount.
Okay, look, I want to ask about the top line. How do we get the top line numbers for the military aid? Where did those come from? Anybody want to answer that? I'll ask Ranking Member DeLore.
The numbers, quite honestly, mirror what came out of the Senate. And so that this package, and that's what the Speaker has talked about, and this is what the agreement was, and it was back and forth in which they came forward with what essentially was the Senate package.
So these top line numbers are pretty much what the Senate top line numbers are.
It's what came out of it first came forward with what the president had proposed earlier on, and then there was the deliberation about it in the Senate. The Senate came forward, and that the numbers that are been proposed here are essentially the numbers that had been asked for earlier on in this process, going back, I think, several months.
The Speaker told me that the reason the numbers are both the same is they both came from the Pentagon. And
look, I have to imagine, the numbers didn't come out of the air. When you do you're looking at what the estimates are, what's needed, what the costs. And by the way, I think it was mentioned, but we can look at what the it's probably coming from the administration and from the Pentagon. But there's money in here that deals with the replenishment, which is estimated. I think there's an estimate of overall of about $50 billion. That is for the U.S. Industrial base. And, we are providing the weapons, and then we need to make sure that we deal with national security, domestic national security, and that money is replenished. That's in here. That comes from the administration and from the Pentagon.
The gentleman yields.
I'll yield to Mr. Neguse.
I'm going to interject here. We do have a lot to get through today, so I'm going to ask people to be respectful of each other on the time. We've been pretty generous.
Then maybe I won't yield and you use your time, Mr. Neguse.
I think that's what I would suggest.
I was
Save
going
the colloquy for 5 minutes from now.
Okay, I was going to yield, but better judgment intervened. Okay, here's the reason I asked the question. The numbers come from the Pentagon, and I know they're quote the experts, but I'm a little bit concerned that any amendment that's offered in here that would reduce the money in any account is somewhat doomed to fail, because this has sort of been pre-conferenced with the Pentagon. We talk about pre-conference as something we've agreed with the Senate and they've agreed with us, and this thing will go through like, grease through a goose as soon as you pass it in the House. But the problem that I have is I think it's been pre-conference with the Pentagon, and too frequently we just accept their numbers and then do everything we can in our power, the leadership does, to make sure that we don't change a single penny. I think if somebody got an amendment made in order here in this Rules Committee today to reduce some amount of money, it would go down in flames, because everybody just trusts the Pentagon. And, when we trusted the Pentagon, we get, $400 hammers and $2,000 toilet seats. Actually, that might be a fair price based on inflation these days. But in the 90s, that was a big deal. So I think we should provide more pushback and not just take for granted the numbers that the Pentagon sends us. And that's what concerns me about the numbers here. The last topic of legislation in this bill that I want to talk about, Mr. Chairman, is the so-called TikTok ban. This was not unanimously supported on the floor of the House. It's been described as a sweetener in the bill. Doesn't sweeten the package for me at all. It's kind of sour, if you ask me. And my concern is, why does the bill allow the president to ban not just apps but websites? And there are three conditions under which the president can ban an app or a website. Either it's 10% owned by a foreign adversary country, or it is domiciled in a foreign adversary country, or the third option, which is most concerning to me, is that it's controlled by a foreign adversary country. Now, there's an article out today about me saying that I'm a friend of Putin simply because I've not voted for the aid to Ukraine. So there are those in the media who would declare me an adversary of things or a friend of Putin. And I am concerned that that is a large loophole in the TikTok bill that should not be in there, because we shouldn't give the president broad authority to declare foreign adversary countries and or then declare an app or a website under the control of foreign adversary country. Chairman McCall, do you have any concern about giving the president that much authority?
Well, as I understand that provision, it applies to successor corporations that would purchase, say, a ByteDance that would perform the same functions as TikTok does, controlled by the PRC, with the algorithms that then control the narrative that's manipulated. And to understand this concept, I mean, TikTok, ByteDance, has these algorithms. They perpetuate a narrative that I believe persuades the thought control in the United States by the PRC. For instance, you type in Israel-Palestinian, you're going to get a very pro-Palestinian version, in TikTok. A lot of it's influenced by China's narrative, not the United States. Our concern is what they can do with your phone. They can get your keystrokes. They can manipulate your messaging. They know all your website, everything you're doing. All your personal data on your phone is vulnerable to the PRC. So, I mean, you as a libertarian of all people, if you want to protect privacy, I want to protect privacy from the PRC. I don't want the PRC in my phone. And what I like about the bill is that it requires ByteDance to divest itself in the United States. And that means another company, hopefully an American company, would buy it. It has the algorithms. It just wouldn't be under the control of the PRC and the PRC narrative that they can manipulate with the algorithms.
Isn't it true, though, that they already divested their data storage to an American company here in the United States?
But not their algorithms.
Not their algorithms.
Yeah, and that's the key.
But can we force a company to show us their algorithms?
They're saying, you can't, you have to divest your assets in the United States.
But what happens if somebody declares, if the president, we've given the president, not Congress, the guy could be more comfortable with the bill if it said Congress is banned, may come back and decide there's a successor company that's substantially the same thing, that's spying on Americans and sending it to foreign countries. But this bill, I'm afraid, is so broad that if you have the wrong president or the wrong president's cabinet, that they could use this bill to declare an app or a website as controlled by a foreign adversary, not owned by, not domiciled in, but controlled by. And that's a concern that I have, because we have seen these programs abused by the executive branch, where we have a weaponization of government committee, where we saw CISA, a bill that passed Congress in 2018. It's been abused. It's at the center of Missouri v. Biden. They call it, the attorneys there call it the nerve center for the censorship of Americans on social media. And I'm just afraid that we are creating another authority for the executive branch where we could have withheld some discretion to keep the president, whoever that may be, we don't know who's going to win the next election, whoever that may be, may abuse that authority. So that's.
Well, let me say I respect that, and if we see that occurring, this would be successor corporations in the PRC conducting the same type of behavior. And let me just remind the committee that Congress banned TikTok amongst ourselves. We banned TikTok within the Congress and the federal government. If we're going to do that with members of Congress, because every national security expert, intelligence, military, they will tell you that this is a spy balloon in your phone, like a Chinese spy balloon in your phone. And if you're worried about privacy, as I know you are, you should be extremely worried about that. And if we don't think Congress should be using TikTok, why in the world would we let our children use it? Or the American people?
Just to be clear, there are a lot of congressmen who are using TikTok, maybe not on official phones or on government computers.
Well, they do so if they're, you know.
I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
My concern was shared by somebody, some lobbyists who have websites that are for online shopping or online reviews or for travel reviews, and they got a carve-out in this TikTok ban bill because they had the same concerns that I had, that it could be broadly applied. And so, you know, that gives me some concern that they got that carve-out in there. Do you know why they had that carve-out? Does anybody know?
I think it requires divestiture. Look, I'd be happy to work with you on this.
So,
but you know, the intent behind the law is for ByteDance to divest its, you know, its company, so it's owned by either an American company or an ally that's not going to use these algorithms to, you know, provide mind control, thought control on our children in the United States. And not only that, but tracking your keystrokes, you know, getting into what you're looking at on your websites. Just all this data in your phone. You have more data. I mean, this is you, right? This phone has everything about you, and it should be protected and very private. And the last country I want looking at my phone, and I'm sanctioned by the PRC, by the way, is China.
So just closing this out, the TikTok bill was authored by a member of Congress who's going to leave on Friday, and this may be passed on Saturday. So I wonder, is there any precedent for somebody getting a bill after they pass, the primary sponsor of a bill? He's actually got two titles in this rule. There are two titles in the there are two bills of his that he authored in the fourth title that's covered by this rule, and he's not even going to be here on Saturday.
My understanding, and I can't speak for Mr. Gallagher, is that he's agreed to stick around for the vote.
For the vote on Saturday?
Correct.
So this is his going away gift. Yeah, I would think he would stay to get his going away present, which is my.
Yeah, we should.
My understanding,
We
he will
should
be here
speculate
for
about the motives of another member who's not here.
Yeah.
Is the gentleman prepared to give back his time?
I have one question for the chairman, if he'll indulge me. You know, I've been on this committee, and I've always tried to. When I got on this committee, I said surprises are for little kids at birthday parties, not, you know, congressmen. And I've tried to never surprise anybody. I've disappointed a few people, but I've never surprised them. I tell them what I'm going to do, and I've told the chairman what I'm going to do in this situation. But there's speculation in the media, I don't know where it came from, that this rule will change the threshold for the motion to vacate. Is the chairman aware of that? Is that going to be included in this rule?
You know, I've not seen the rule written down, so I will have to leave that for right now. We'll certainly have a chance to visit about it before we vote on it.
You're not aware of any effort to do that?
I haven't directly been informed. I've, like you, seen things in the press, but I don't have any direct knowledge of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.